This is for you. This is for your people to get down those last logistical details to make sure everything is in place and everything is ready to go for the actual Easter Sunday at 10 o'clock.
Welcome to the Must Increase podcast, where our mission is to increase His name through your church. I am your host, Luke Clayton, and I'm joined by my co-host and producer extraordinaire, Mr. Bo Snyder. Bo, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Luke. Good to be here for the last episode of the Easter podcast series.
That's exactly right. This is the last episode of the Best Easter Ever podcast series, sponsored by our friends at the Swap.io. The Swap.io is your church's only solution for managing personal outreach digitally, and you can get started for free at the swap.io. And we do want to say thank you to the Swap for being our sponsors for this podcast. And yeah, hard to believe that we are coming to the end of this series. This is the first time we've done something with a series, and I've really enjoyed it. I don't know about you. It's been something that's been really just exciting and interesting, a little bit challenging for us as we move through and explore content and have to develop content. And so it's been a good experience.
It has been. I've really enjoyed putting it together, and I've learned a lot putting it together because next year we'll have something to look back on and say, hey, this is what worked, had good feedback here. So I'm already looking forward to the next series, whether it's Easter or whatever it is. So this has been good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we move into this final part of the series, I want to go ahead and tell you of a free resource that you can pick up, because you're going to want this. If you're able, you're going to want to go get this now so that you can follow along with us, because it's going to kind of serve as the outline for the episode. So head over to mustincrease.com/prep list. That's mustincrease.com/prep list, or check out the link in the show notes and download your free service prep list. This is a free list that kind of helps you go through the final details of really any service, but we're going to look at it in application to a special service such as Easter. So once again, head over to mustincrease.com/prep list, or check the link in the show notes and go ahead and pick up that resource and follow along.
And this is where we are in the Easter season is, we in the past few weeks, we've talked about, mailers and outreach and, all these things that you can do to, kind of get ready for the service and, get people into the church. But that time is really over.
Yeah.
I mean, you might have a couple days, maybe, kind of get out there in the community. But this prep list that we're talking about today, this is for you. This is for your people to get down those last logistical details to make sure everything is in place and everything is ready to go for the actual Easter Sunday at 10 o'clock.
Exactly. And it's not that your outreach efforts at this point are in vain. In fact, you can, you've got, as of release of this podcast, you've got 6 more days to invite people to your services. But really, if none of that's in motion by this point, yeah, you're kind of wasting your time, and you've kind of missed the boat, if you will. But you can still be inviting people and whatever. But this episode is more about what you can do to make those final preparations, put those finishing touches, if you will, on your service particularly. So don't stop the outreach, don't stop the social media posts and whatever, and you can go and check out last week's episode if you're interested in learning more about the social media and the digital outreach aspect and all of that. But we want to talk today about what you're going to do this week as you lead up to the big day. And so if by now, hopefully you've got your service prep list, and really we're just going to kind of move through this list. We're going to use this as an outline. Now, of course, not every single item on this list will apply to every church out there. And there's probably items on this list that you would say, hey, well, this should be on our list particularly. And we understand that. But this is a pretty generic list that probably will work for 9 out of 10 churches.
And I want to say this too. This list, great list, by the way, it's not just something that will work for Easter. This could almost be applied to any special Sunday or even any Sunday of the year,
yes.
Really. There is things on here that should be checked every single Sunday. Maybe you can assign someone, hey, you're going to check these things every single Sunday to make sure they're ready to go. So this isn't just for Easter. This can be applied to any Sunday of the year.
Yeah, and just a little shout out here. By now, our listeners know that we are very closely associated with our home church, Franklin Road Baptist Church. And so I do have to give a shout out to their team there. They've really helped us put this list together. We've also consulted with guys that have been on the podcast podcast before, like Jeremy Linentine and a few others, Drew Shetler, and a lot of these guys have really contributed to the content on this list. So once again, you may not find it fully comprehensive for what you need, but it's at least very close. And really, the nature of it is each question on this list or each item on this list is just a yes or no question. And based on how you answer that question, you should know how to react. So let's get started. There are 5 categories on the list. And the first category is that of operational. And so this just means stuff that simply applies to the operations of your service. And so one of those is, the first item is, are any ministry leaders absent? So that's just a simple question to ask yourself. Is there anybody in leadership that's significant, that usually has a significant role in our service? And depending on the size and the nature of your church, this could be different. Obviously, the pastor, that's an obvious one. The one who oversees your music and worship, that would be another one. But even thinking about things such as, well, class leaders or group leaders or kids ministry leaders, you have to think about, are there any ministry leaders absent? So yes or no question there. Are there any ministry leaders absent?
Next question is this weekend's schedule different than usual? In a lot of churches, it is this Sunday. So
yeah, I know there's some churches out there that are doing multiple services. Maybe they're doing some type of Saturday event and they wouldn't usually. So that's something to ask. Next question: have any classrooms or locations changed? So once again, with a special service or something special going on, maybe there's a kids class that would normally meet in this room and they're meeting in this room or whatever that may be.
Next would be, does the service have a special focus? On Easter, I sure hope so.
Yeah, obviously the focus of Easter, really the focus of every Sunday at church, should be ultimately Jesus Christ and really his resurrection. But obviously Easter Sunday, you're as particularly focusing on the resurrection. So that's a great question to ask. And then, does this service require any additional stage construction? So if you're doing some type of dramatic presentation, or I know pastors maybe on Easter will start a new series and they like to get some set decor or props, and so you have to think about that.
Now, as we said before, with 1 week left, there are some things that you can do to, enhance your service. And, maybe, with Easter service, you want to build a cross, put something on the stage that, draws attention to it. Maybe that's kind of the pinpoint of your sermon, something like that. So there is time for some things like that. So anything else you want to build, get in touch with somebody, that can be done.
So that takes us through the operational section of this list. And of course, there's also, if you're following along, you'll notice there's a notes section at the end of each category for you to kind of take some notes, write some action items, maybe write some additional things that aren't on this list. And now moving on to the media category of this prep list. And we'll probably take a little bit more time here because that's what we do. And so with that, the first question is, are all audio-visual positions covered for the service?
This is key, and this is the most important question, I think, of this section, is having every position filled. And I would recommend this: have a backup for every single person.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've had times to where, like, hey, it's 10 minutes to the service. Where's our sound guy? Where's our screens guy? And, someone's running all over trying to find the person. And anything can happen. Anything can go wrong. So I would just say, hey, this person is assigned to this, and then you need to have someone under you that you were in contact with just in case something goes wrong.
Yeah, and here's another thought on that. You say, well, we don't have enough people to maybe have a backup for each person. I found it's also valuable to maybe have somebody who's maybe a floater. Like, they maybe are never assigned to a particular position, but they know enough about the sound system or the live stream or whatever to where they could really fill in for any position. So that is a very important question there.
Next question, are there any sermon slides or graphics for this Sunday? Now, Luke, this is something you do on a weekly basis, so that's kind of your thing.
Yeah,
there.
That's kind of my ministry at our church. Is I've for years now run the presentation software and the slides and screens at our church. And I can tell you this, just from someone who's been doing it for a while, having as much of that content before the day of is extremely helpful. I know a lot of times, the worship leader or music director director won't have his, songs picked out for a service until maybe a day or two before, and maybe even the pastor doesn't have his outline finalized if you're wanting to put that up on slides. But especially for a week like Easter, you got to get this stuff ready days, and really, you probably should already have your service order determined weeks out, but you've definitely got to get it finalized to the point to where someone like a slides guy or a guy who runs your screens can start inputting that into your presentation software and getting it ready to go. And so, make sure you've got your slides and graphics ready days or even weeks in advance. Next question, and Bo, you can talk about this one. Have all videos been presented on our screens? And what we're saying there is presented before the actual service.
Yes, I'm so glad you put this question in there, because it is not, I don't know how many times I have made a video or, put something together and they didn't test it out beforehand. And you play it and, I'm sitting there, a nightmare going on saying, that's not the way it should sound, or that's not the way it should look. The color is off. Something is desperately wrong here. And, sometimes you can get away with people don't notice, but if you just take the time to have a check and say, hey, we're going to run this, make sure it looks good, make sure it sounds good. It can save you so much headache and pain in the end.
Yep, and like Bo was saying, all sound systems are different, all projectors are different. And so now if you buy, you purchase like a pre-made video or something, you may not be able to edit the video itself, but you can at least maybe tweak your sound system to work for that particular audio, the way it's mixed, or maybe make adjustments to the color on your projectors or something, whatever you need to do. But make sure you've at least played them before so that, hey, you know they work. I'm going to tell a story here, and if you have to edit this out for time's sake, I get it, but I am going to say it. I'm just going to confess something. Last Christmas, at our big Christmas service at our church, I did not play a video before. I just assumed it was ready to go, and it was the welcome video that we played for the service that gave all the upcoming announcements and everything. What happened was, because I did not check it beforehand, I played the previous week's video, and we looked really unprofessional. We had to kind of like fade the video out mid video because it was announcing irrelevant information that had passed. And so I just want to say, just from a personal experience, give that story here, that could potentially be something that could definitely hinder your service.
Yeah, don't let that happen on Easter. Please don't let
I let it happen on Christmas.
Well, when you got a bunch of eyes that are fresh guests and visitors, so please check your videos ahead of time.
Just from a personal standpoint, it seems like I've always made my biggest blunders on the biggest days that I've participated in. I have plenty of stories there, but we're going to move on.
Moving on with video things, talking about is live stream functioning properly? Now, live stream is something, it's a tech thing, and as good as technology is, it can go wrong. So if you have your system in place and it runs well every week, no reason to worry, it should be fine. But once again, make sure if you have a system where you have to schedule it, make sure you schedule it for the right time. If your service has changed, there's been times where service times have changed in the past, and we're like, hey, why isn't live stream coming up? It's like, well, normally it's scheduled for 10:55, but we're starting at 10:30 this week, or just make sure that's all ready.
Yep, and live stream is one of those things that's reliably unreliable. In that, you might think, hey, everything's good to go, but I don't even oversee live stream like in our church when we work there, and or when we serve there rather, and somebody will text me like every once in a while, hey, the live stream's down. It's like, well, I can't do anything about that. So it's one of those things where it's like you really do need to at least check it every time. And then here's the next. We're going to kind of hit these next two at the same time. The first question: have the microphone batteries been replaced? And secondly, have the microphones been assigned and tested? Mic problems is probably the number one audiovisual issue, if not the number one issue that affects a service.
I'm over here shaking my head. Yes. I don't know how many times I've been at an event, whether it's church or not, and something goes wrong with the sound system. The person starts dying, cutting in and out. It is the biggest distraction.
Yep.
It's when something starts happening with a sound, people just tune out. They almost get frustrated, and they're like, okay, this is going to end because it's driving me nuts. So please check your microphones, have them tested. If someone is singing, have them run through it. Do all of those things. Just check as many things as you can.
Yep, and one of the key words here is make sure they are assigned. Your microphones are assigned. So if you're using handheld microphones, you've got like a special group singing or something, make sure that the each person of the group knows beforehand what microphone they are to use. If you haven't designated your microphones by like number, putting a small little number on each one, or maybe by color, whatever it is, so that they know, hey, I'm grabbing mic number 2. I've also seen times where I don't really do much with sound, but I sit up, with our sound guy in the sound booth at our church. And I've also seen times where a group gets up to sing, somebody didn't know what microphone to grab, and the sound guy is just guessing on what mic they're using. And so make sure that, and then the batteries, that's just a given. I'm of the opinion, just replace those things every Sunday, even if you think they've got a full charge, because the last thing you want is you don't want them dying. And so next question, has sound check for the service been completed? And what we mean by sound check goes along with microphones, but really when we say the word sound check, we're talking about an overall, more or less run through of the service before the service happens. A lot of churches, and I will tell you this, all churches that do church right are doing this like the Saturday night before Sunday. They are bringing in everybody involved in the service that has a special part in the service, and they are running through every part. They're balancing the mics, they're checking the videos, all that stuff.
As Luke, as you know, I graduated from Pensacola Christian College, and I used to work for the campus church telecast, the big cameras and the broadcasting and all that.
They've got a big get up down there.
They do. And something we did every Sunday morning before every service is we had a list. Every cameraman, every sound person had a list of the entire service, and we ran through the entire thing. Not just like the beginning and the end, like the entire service. It took like an hour to do, but it was so cool because everyone made notes like, hey, this person is going to do this at this point in the song. This person, needs to make this adjustment with whether it's lights, audio, no matter what it is. So that way there's no surprises. Mm-hmm. If something goes wrong, it's your fault because you knew it was coming. So if you have to do that, take Saturday night or Sunday morning early, say, hey, everyone's going to get here and we're going to make sure everything is in place. Like people know when to bring the lights up, when to bring them down, when to, hey, make sure the choir mics are muted when they're walking in, all these different kinds of things. So it sounds like a lot of work, and it is, but it's worth it.
Yep. And, of course, Bo there's talking about Campus Church, which is a large church, a huge telecast. And obviously, not all churches are anywhere close to that. But nonetheless, your church by now is at least using a sound system. You're probably at least using some kind of lighting, and it's very likely that you're using some type of projection or screen. This is all stuff that has to be checked, and a run-through can help with that. So that completes the media section. The rest of the sections are important, and we're just going to kind of go through them pretty quickly. We may hit on a couple of these more than the other, and some of them, these questions, I may just read and move on. So facilities is pretty obvious. Checking things like, hey, is the air conditioning running or functioning properly? Does the weather require any significant adjustments to make the air conditioning? One of the items you'll find on this list is as weather. At the top of the list is you write the date and you write Sunday's weather, because if it's raining, if it's cold, if it's hot, that's going to affect this. So that's a good thing to know beforehand. Our key areas such as lobbies, bathrooms, auditorium, is that all clean? That makes a huge impression on guests. Our supplies for certain leaders and locations well stocked. So if a kid's class needs handouts or worksheets or whatever, do they have all of that? And then are there particular locations on campus that are closed or unavailable this week? So maybe your bathroom's undergoing a renovation, or a parking lot is, in fact, I know our church, like their parking lot is kind of under construction right now during this busy season. Either way, you need to make people aware of that and try to accommodate and kind of a pardon our progress type feel. So that's the facilities. And then moving on to hospitality. And this is obviously a big part of making a difference on those who come to your church and guests. And so the first question here is, are there any members of the hospitality or parking lot teams absent? So is there somebody who is out this week who normally is here, part of the team? You need to ask that question.
Are there any extra handouts or resources to be distributed? Once again, hospitality, Easter, that goes hand in hand. It's like, hey, what can we do extra, but it's not only good enough to have the idea, it's like you got to physically have these things ready to go. So make sure you're ready.
Yeah, and like as far as the handouts and resources, examples of that is maybe you've got a special program or brochure printed up for this service. A lot of churches are going to do a bulletin each week, but is there something additional? Maybe your pastor's got a special outline he wants to put in everybody's hand for them to follow along, something like that. Next question, this is a big one. Do we have enough connection cards or guest cards or visitor cards or whatever you want to call them? It's essentially a card that collects visitors' information. This is big. You've got to make sure you have these ready to go and they're well stocked and you're ready to distribute these.
Continuing on with a guest, are gifts for guests ready to be distributed? Are they in bags? Are they put together? How many do you have? Just in case you give all of them away, do you have extra in the back room somewhere? These are all little things, but if we can just put these in front of you to kind of have that extra thought, extra preparation, hopefully it's a help to you.
Yeah, and obviously for Easter, you're probably expecting more guests than usual, so you're going to want to make sure you've got extra gifts ready to be given out. Next question here, are there any special guests to be recognized or attended to by the hospitality team? So we talked last week about giving potential guests the ability to RSVP to your service online. That's kind of what we're talking about here. These people that have gone the extra mile to indicate that they're going to be there, they've given you their name, their info, you're going to want to make sure you take that down and you try to find them as they come in and make sure they're greeted and they get a gift. So hospitality is huge. Make sure that you've got these needs covered. And the last category on this prep list is communication. And this is huge. You can do all of this, but if you don't communicate it to those who are essential people in your church, then it really does you no good.
Now this list, everything that we just ran through, all of these are excellent points, but if you are the only person, as a church leader, as a pastor who is aware of this list, it's probably not going to help you that much. Take this list and communicate it with other people. Make copies and say, hey, you take care of this area, you take care of this area. Delegate, empower some people to take care of some things for you. This is what this list is all about.
Yes, so a couple questions on this part of the list is, are there any other areas of concern? Anything else that we overlooked on this list that we need to know about? Does anyone need to be informed of the changes to this week's services? Obviously, you need to tell those people if any of these areas are affected, if something in your media department, then obviously your media team needs to know about that. If something in the hospitality department is different, then obviously your hospitality people need to know about that. Do all essential service contributors have a copy of the service order or cue card or set list or whatever you call it? This is a big thing for us as the AV team that have ever worked on a media team like that, making sure we kind of have that copy of the service order so we know what's coming up next so we don't have to guess. And then lastly, can we do anything else? And this is a big one, and we're actually taking a little bit of time to discuss this one. Can we do anything else to prevent potential mistakes, miscommunication, or frustrations? Now, something huge there's going to be stuff that's going to come up that's unpredictable, that doesn't know. But here's what I like to say. Put yourself in a position to where as much as possible, you know how you're going to react to something before it happens. So for example, media, let's jump back to there because this is one of those things where it's like, hey, things can fall apart. I've been in services before where the lights go out sometimes in extremely, like there's a power outage, but also maybe something like a stage light blows out. Okay. Or I've been in services before where the screen projectors, one of the projectors stopped working. What is your policy if that happens? Some people, because if not, you're going to be in panic mode. So for example, a simple policy that we follow whenever, like I said, I serve in the screens and the projection and all of that. Whenever a projector or something is malfunctioning, the policy is turn them off. We will not use them that service. That may complicate things a little bit. For example, especially if you're projecting lyrics on the screen and things, yes, there's going to be a level to where that's going to complicate things. And if you're showing a video, we understand that, but you're going to have to turn them off and we're just going to have to react accordingly. It's not that it solves the problem, but you know how at least you're going to react to that. So that's an example. So this is huge. Can we do anything else to prevent potential mistakes, miscommunication, or frustrations beforehand? You have to think through that and then communicate that to those involved.
Well, there you have it. The service prep list that you can go through to kind of get yourself ready for Easter, those last minute things. You can head over to mustincrease.com/prep list to get that. Well, hey, here it is. We're wrapping up the last episode of the Best Easter Ever podcast series. Once again, we've enjoyed putting this together. We've learned a lot. Hope that it's been a help to you. And once again, as the producer of the podcast, I always want to hear from you. If you have any feedback on this series, or maybe something you'd like to hear in the future, or just any kind of questions, you can always email those to podcast@mustincrease.com.
Yes, and we've mentioned this before, but pretty much with this series, we've obviously been releasing a new episode every week. And so from what we can tell by our metrics, looks like our listeners are enjoying that and appreciating that. And so we thank you for listening, and we appreciate everybody who listens or subscribes to this podcast. We appreciate, and we thank you for that. And so with that in mind, we're going to continue to do the podcast every week. And so next week, we will be back with you. And though it's not technically part of the podcast series here, we're going to be discussing follow-up process and things a little bit like that. So be sure to tune in. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. This means everything to us when you subscribe to our podcast, and we just love to know that you are subscribed and you're getting these downloaded to your device or wherever you're listening to them regularly, and we appreciate that. Also, it really helps us when you leave a review. So if you're listening in the Apple Podcast app or iTunes or something like that, when you jump over there and you leave us a review, it helps us out in terms of like iTunes kind of favors our podcast, boosts our ratings, all that good stuff. So we really appreciate that. And of course, we'd love it if you went the extra mile and you shared this podcast with somebody you know who you think will be benefited from it. This podcast is for church leaders and helping them in the areas of their media, marketing, outreach, and so on. And so we've really enjoyed being with you for the Best Easter Ever podcast series. Be sure to join us again next week on the Must Increase podcast, where our mission is to increase His name through